Welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and what does that magic lingo mean? I made a video like this before, about 8 months ago maybe, and I really just made that on a whim. I just thought it would be an interesting thing to do that I'm not sure anyone has ever tackled before. Magic players tend to have a lot of lingo that they throw around, and after I made that video, I realized two things. First of all, I missed a whole lot. I was just sitting down, just thinking up a few off the top of my head, and man, there's way more than I thought there was. So I'm going to cover a lot more of them in this video. Also, a lot of players actually don't, I made it sort of as a fun, goofy thing, but what I realized is there's actually a lot of newer players out there that don't know what these terms actually mean, or particularly even more so don't know where they came from. And I like to talk somewhat about the origins of these words as well. A lot of them come from actual cards from back in the day. So let's get to it. I'm going to start out with Mana Rock. And again, a lot of people probably know what a lot of these terms are, but just in case you don't, a Mana Rock is an artifact that gives mana. There's lots of ways to create extra mana in the format. There are different names for a lot of them. Mana Dork is another one, right? Mana Dork is a creature that creates mana, typically taps for mana, and a Mana Rock is also a artifact that taps for mana. I guess there are other ways to get mana out of an artifact that I don't think it would be called a Mana Rock necessarily. I guess it could be. It's a gray area, right? With all of these things. And I'll just touch clearly on, I talked about ramp in the first video, and a lot of people got on me about my definition of ramp. Ramp actually does come from the card Rampant Growth, okay? That is where it does originate from, okay? So I'm not wrong about that. Whether or not that's what it means today, maybe that's not the case, and people say, oh, well, I use ramp to include this, this, and this. Mana Rocks, Mana Dorks, Treasure Tokens, whatever. Okay, so what's the word you use to describe what a rampant growth does, right? What's that word? You probably use the word ramp. So what if I just want to talk about that, right? If I want to talk about Mana Rocks, I'll use the term Mana Rocks. If I want to use the term Mana Dorks, I use that term. If I want to use the term Ritual, I use that term. What if I just want to talk about, I go get lands out of my deck and put them directly into play? What word do I use for that? That doesn't include all those other things, right? That's why I like to use the term ramp to specifically mean what a rampant growth does, what a cultivate does, because what term do you use to specifically mean that, right? Because if we start using ramp to include all of those other things, then there's no word. Now you've hijacked the term of what a rampant growth does to mean all those other things, right? So I'm throwing the question out there. What word do you use for that then? If you want to use ramp to mean a Cabal Coffers or something, then what word do you use for what a rampant growth does, right? So comment below if you have a specific word that means just that, not treasure tokens and all the other stuff. What word do you use to describe what green does really, really good, right? Which is put lands directly into play from their library. But moving on with the list, Blink, and this is one I can't believe I missed. It's such an obvious one. Blink means I exile my creature. This is what it has come to mean, which is interesting, and I'll get into the origins of the word. It means I exile a creature and then it comes back into play, whether that means right away or at the beginning of the next end step or something like that, right? It means blink. It originated actually with the card Blinking Spirit, and the card Blinking Spirit doesn't actually blink, which is kind of funny. It actually returns to hand, which is more like bouncing. So, even though the term blink originated with Blinking Spirit doesn't actually do that. More so though, Flicker. Flicker means the same thing. Flicker is I exile something and then it comes back into play. Flicker actually originates from the card Flicker. So that, and again, if you look at the card Flicker, it says exactly that. I think it's the first card that ever did that. There was also the card Flickering Ward, which would have came out right before. But again, that's returning to hand. So Flicker is the first card that does actually what the term Flicker or Blink means, which is to exile something and then it comes back into play on its own. So that's sort of, I guess, where the origins of that word comes from. Next up, and this is a funny one, Wooburg. I mean, the term isn't funny. It's a little funny, Wooburg, right? The funny part is there's actually a lot of people out there that don't know what this means. So, and I actually had a comment. There are two comments on the last video, as in I should mention this in my next video. WUBRG, it means all 5 colors. And I actually had a guy in the video say, I don't know why. WUBRG means all five colors, and I don't know why. Well, the reason you don't know why is because, first of all, you're spelling it wrong, okay? It's not WUBRG with an E or anything like that. It's WUBRG, W-U-B-R-G. And that is because those letters stand for the 5 different colors. That's why WUBRG means all 5 colors. And the reason why, obviously, because the W stands for white, the G stands for green, the R stands for red, the B stands for black, and the U stands for blue. For those who don't know, if you're new to the format, the one letter representation for the color blue is U. And obviously the reason for that is because there's 2 B's, right? There's a black and a blue, and you can't use B for both of them. So U has come to represent the color blue. That's why WUBRG. WUBRG stands for white, blue, black, red, green. And you just pronounce it Woo. It just has become to be pronounced WUBRG, even though there might be some vowels missing there. But that's why, and that's where it comes from. Floating, float or float mana. Essentially, that just means you're putting mana into your mana pool that you aren't using immediately, right? It's funny if you get into the very specifics of the game, how you're supposed to cast spells is you are actually supposed to announce the spell you're casting. You essentially put it on the stack. Then you pick typically you pick your targets if there's targets, and then you pay the mana, right? Paying the mana is actually the last part. A lot of people, when you're playing Paper Magic, will tap the mana first before they actually show the spell. It's kind of funny that, it doesn't matter at the end of the day, but nevertheless, when you're tapping mana to put it in your mana pool, you're floating mana, right? That's what the term means, because you're not using it right away. Now that can, if you have, something in play that where your mana pool doesn't empty, you can float it a lot longer than you normally would. Typically, when you float mana, you're going to leave it in your pool just for a little bit, because when the phase ends, obviously it goes away. So you're going to have to use it before then. But floating mana just means I'm putting mana in my mana pool, and then maybe I'm going to figure out how I'm going to use it. Or maybe I'm going to cast an Armageddon, right? So float mana, cast an Armageddon. I've already tapped all my lands, so now I have mana in my mana pool to do something after all of the lands have been destroyed, right? Ping. So ping, again, another one I can't believe I missed. Ping means essentially do 1 damage to. I mean, really, if you boil it down, a lot of times a pinger is a creature that deals 1 damage when you tap it. But really, you can ping, I think, with a spell, an artifact, with anything. Ping me essentially really just boils down to doing 1 damage. I think you just casting a spell that deals 1 damage to something, that's pinging, right? So pinging essentially is 1 damage. And then if I'm doing 2 damage, it's shock, right? So shock, which obviously originates from the card shock, which deals 2 damage to any target, that is shocking something, right? But also shock has come to mean shock, like a shock land, for example, right? The shock lands are the, those Ravnica duels that came out that when they enter the battlefield, they do you 2 damage. So they're shocking you. That's why they're called shock lands. So it has come to mean anything that does 2 damage. And bolt, obviously originating from the card lightning bolt, has meant 3 damage, right? So anything that's doing 3 damage is bolting, essentially, right? So ping means 1 damage. Shock means 2 damage, bolt means 3 damage in other respects of the game. Lord, or a Lord effect, is, I guess it has to be a creature. Yeah, it has to be a creature. If it's not a creature, it's going to be an anthem effect, probably. A Lord effect is a creature that gives a boost or a benefit to a certain tribe. The originator of this term is Lord of Atlantis, I believe, which obviously has the name Lord and gives you that tribal boost effect, right? Gives a boost to your merfolk. So that's, I'm pretty sure, where the term originated from, but it's doing that, right? Again, you look at that card, it's giving a boost to a specific tribe, to your merfolk, and usually it's a +1/+1, but it doesn't have to be, right? A Lord effect could be anything where you're giving some sort of advantage to a certain tribe, right? That's a Lord. Next up, evasion. So when you say a creature has evasion, or it doesn't have an evasion, right? Like this creature's really big, like it's 20/20, but it doesn't have an evasion, so that means it's really easy to block, right? That can be not so great, especially in a commander game. And You know, the most obvious one here is flying. Flying is probably the most common form of evasion, right? It's obviously harder to block because it can only be blocked by creatures with flying or with reach. Trample is another form of evasion. Even though it's not harder to block, it's easy to get into damage, right? So it's not necessarily harder to block. You want to be getting in for damage, right? Trample is a form of evasion. Intimidate, menace, right? There's lots of different forms of evasion. Shadow is a form of evasion. So I guess it's a little bit making it harder to block my creature, but more so it's I'm getting in for damage, because certainly trample is an evasion. A lot of people refer to trample as evasion, and that doesn't make your creature harder to block. It just makes it easier for you to get for damage, right? So evasion is essentially a combination of those things. Next up is cantrip. Cantrip means I cast a spell and it doesn't matter what the spell is doing. You're just drawing a card. And obviously it can also be I draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, which used to be a thing back in the day. Like Burnout, for example, is a card that is kind of a little bit of a niche favorite of mine. It's a cantrip, right? And that's what to me makes it a better card, because it's never going to be a dead card, because you can use it to target your opponent's instant. And even if it's not blue, you can still cast it, and then it cantrips. On the beginning of the next person's upkeep, you'll get to draw a card. So it replaces itself. Basically, cantrip is it replaces itself. It's any card that is going to, you know, Gitaxian Probe, right? It's a cantrip. You're getting some effect, but also it's replacing itself, so you're not out anything. And then I'm going to give a shout out to Matthew Thurber, who gave me this giant list in the last video. And I'm like, man, I can't believe I forgot all those things. I covered some of them already, but I'm just going to bang them out because he had a bunch. First of all, grip. So grip is your hand, right? The hand that you're holding is your grip. Yard. Your yard is your graveyard, right? Just a quick term, easier term for your graveyard. Manafix. Manafix is getting the appropriate mana that you need into play, right? So a mono, whatever, any monocolor deck is probably never going to have to worry about mana fixing, because you're always going to have the colors of mana that you need in order to cast all your spells. Whereas a 5-color deck, mana fixing is going to be really important, because you're going to need all those different colors in play. WINCON. WINCON is short for win condition, something that I tend to not concentrate nearly enough on in my decks. A lot of times I'm more concerned about the strategy and having fun and being able to deal with what my opponents are doing. And a lot of times people ask me, hey, what's the WINCON in this deck? Oh, you attack with your creatures. I find 90% of the decks that I play, and a lot of the decks that I play against, your WINCON is you just attack with your creatures. I mean, even if it's with a Craterhoof Behemoth, you're just attacking with your creatures and reducing your opponent's life total to 0. But your WINCON your win condition can be a lot of different things. It can be I combo off. It can be I have a Celestial Convergence in my deck, like one of my patrons does that I played against the other day. That was a fun, interesting game with that thing in play. It can be a lot of things. Whatever it is that is going to make you win the game. NOMBO. A NOMBO is a non-combo, right? So it's taken from the word combo. It's basically a combo that, it can be a couple of things. It can be a combo that doesn't work, or a card that shuts off a combo, right? So for example, I will use an example, and that's my Tajic deck, Legion's Blade, that I made recently. That has a couple of non-bows in it. And the reason why is because I'm trying to do a couple of different things. So for example, I have Power Stone Minefield in that deck, right? Power Stone Minefield is going to deal damage to all creatures, but with my Tajic in play, my other creatures don't take non-combat damage. So that's a combo. That works. The NOMBO comes in because I have creatures that I want to deal damage to, like my Boros Reckoner, right? So my Boros Reckoner wants the damage. So now I attack with my Boros Reckoner. I take 2 damage from the Power Stone Minefield. Then I can throw 2 damage around to another creature. That's also a combo. However, with my Tajic in play, now it becomes a NOMBO because the Tajic is shutting off the combo with the Boros Reckoner, right? So it's a bit of a combo, bit of a NOMBO. So I have a couple of things that will shut off if my commander's in play, and a couple of things that don't work, but work if my commander's not in play, right? So it becomes a little bit of a difficult deck to play, because I do have a lot of NOMBOs in that deck. If I have certain cards in play, I have to avoid playing other cards, right? So essentially that's what NOMBO means. It means you're shutting off your combo, or it's 2 cards that Even maybe you think combo, but actually don't. Next up, FIZZLE. So FIZZLE is, this is a term that used to be used a lot more back in the day, isn't used as much anymore because I think they changed the rules. It used to be if you had a return to dust, okay, and you targeted 2 artifacts. Let's say I target my opponent's soul ring and I target my opponent's treasure token. I don't know why you would ever do that, but let's say I did that. If my opponent sacrifices the treasure token in response, it is now not a legal target anymore, and that spell would fizzle. That doesn't happen anymore. It used to. It used to be that if one of the targets became illegal, your spell would fizzle, in meaning it wouldn't do anything and the soul ring would survive. The soul ring would stay in play because the return to dust fizzled. They stopped doing that, and I'm kind of glad they did because it really made a lot of these spells that have multiple targets, it made those spells really, really bad because all they had to do was get rid of, if you targeted like, with your Aether Gale, you target a whole bunch of things. If one of those things went away, then nothing got targeted. So it made a lot of those spells really terrible and unplayable. And so they got rid of that. So even if you get rid of one of the targets, the rest still get affected, but you still can't have a fizzle, right? Essentially what it means is I'm targeting something. If the target gets removed, it fizzles. It doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't have to be a spell. It can be an effect as well. You think about, I give my creatures hexproof or something, right? So you're targeting my creature, and in response, I cast a heroic intervention. So now your spell is no longer illegal. It can't legally target my creature, so it fizzles. It does nothing, right? So a Path to Exile, for example, if you target my creature, I heroic intervention in response, your Path to Exile fizzles and doesn't, obviously I'm not going to go look for a land and put it into play, right? MANASCREW or Mana Flood. So these obviously mean the opposite of each other. MANASCREW is you're just not getting any mana, right? And typically it's at the start of the game. I don't know if you can get mana screwed at the I guess every deck's different. If your commander cost 8, can you get mana screwed if you have 6 lands in play? I don't know. But mana screw typically means in the beginning, maybe I had 2 lands into my opening hand. Is that enough? It's up to each individual person to decide whether or not you want to risk having only 2 lands or even 1 land in your opening hand. And then you're just not drawing lands. You're getting mana screwed. Mana flooded is the opposite. I'm just drawing lands off the top. And we've all done this. I keep a 4-land hand, right? It just seems to always be the opposite, right? I keep 4 or 5 lands in my opening hand because I don't want to get mana screwed, and then I end up just drawing lands off the top for the whole first 5 or 6 turns. That's mana flooded, right? So you're just getting lands and nothing else. Big Butt, and this one is kind of a funny one that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't know if there's a particular origin for it. Maybe was Baby Got Back really popular on the radio at the time or something. Big Butt means that a creature has a really high toughness, which... what does that have to do with butts? I don't know, right? If a creature is really tough and they take a lot of damage in order to get them off the table, what's that got to do with having a big butt? Are people with big butts really tough and hard to kill, right? It's kind of a funny one, but that's what it means. Big butt means creature with a really high toughness. Typically, though, also a really low power, right? If you're talking about big butt creatures, you're not going to be talking about a 7/7, because that's just a big creature all around. A big butt creature is a creature that has a 0 power and a 7 toughness, right? So typically big butt means a creature with a way higher toughness than it has power. Impulse Draw. Another one that I can't believe I missed. Impulse Draw is what red does. Interestingly enough, blue used to do it. Originally they had blue doing a lot of Impulse Draw. They switched it to red. And red does it now a lot. Pretty much every set that comes out now has a red Impulse Draw. What Impulse Draw means is you exile cards off the top of your library and you can play them until end of turn or until the end of the next turn, or you basically have a limited amount of time to play those cards, right? If you're exiling cards and you can just play them whenever, that's not Impulse Draw, I don't think. Impulse mean, what does impulse mean, right? It means impulsive. You got to do it right away. You got to do it right now, right? So Impulse Draw means I've exiled cards from the top of my library and I have a very limited window in which to play them. And finally today, Scoop. And I think everyone knows what this one means. Maybe, maybe not. Scoop means I quit. I'm out of here. I'm done. I'm picking up all my cards. I'm scooping up, right? Obviously, it's a paper term. In the digital world, you can still say scoop, but it doesn't really apply. I guess for someone who plays only digital, and there are quite a few players out there, I think, that only have played digital Magic and have never played paper, maybe the term is a little weird for them. Yeah, it means I'm scooping up all my cards. I quit. I'm done, right? And it doesn't have to mean I'm taking my ball and going home sort of scenario, like I quit, I hate this, I'm out of here. It does mean that. It does mean the person who is like maybe throwing a little bit of a hissy fit and taking their stuff and leaving. But it also means, I concede, right? I'm scooping up, okay, you win. I concede. I'm picking up my stuff and I'm done. And that is it. I am done for this video. Another long list of lingo. Did I get them all? I'm sure there's still more out there. But, between this video and the first one, I think I covered a whole lot. And it's fun to talk about these things and some of the origins of where they come from. But it's also nice to, let some of the newer players out there know what these actual words mean and where they originated from, right? So what else? If I missed anything else between the first two videos, let me know below, I guess. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.